Good morning. I'm here with Stu Ashton, and congratulations, Stu, on being recently recognized as a finalist in the Oracle Database Developer Choice Awards. I believe it was in the SQL category for all of your contributions there.
That's right, Todd, and hello. Good morning to everybody.
Yep. So, Stu, thanks again, and that's a huge one. Just even being in the finalists, that's a solid core. My instructions to the judges were, as long as the guys know what they're talking about and they're good contributions back to the community in terms of sharing their knowledge back to the community, then I don't really care who wins in terms of by the popular choice of the picks. So I want everybody to be solid candidates. And the ACE judges and the developer Oracle development team guys that were on the panels did a stellar job of exactly that. So, I mean, I have nothing but, all of the candidates were just really solid people. In fact, I just got off interviewing Kimberg Hansen, and he was telling me about another SQL finalist, and he was telling me about the match recognize clause as one of his favorite features. And then I started reading your blog, and I saw that you were mentioning the same feature, match recognize. And but before I get to any of that, I saw on your blog that you do KU basketball.
Yes,
that you like
right.
KU basketball. And I actually have family in Lawrence, Kansas. So I've got to ask you, how did that come about? How did you like KU basketball?
Well, I was born and raised in Kansas, and everybody in my family went to the University of Kansas except for one sister.
She went to K-State.
No. She went to Northwestern and then Boston, law school in Boston. But she's a KU basketball fan when she's not a Boston sports fan.
Yeah.
So in the family, we're all very we're sports fans of various kinds, and all faithful to KU basketball. I wish we'd had this interview before we lost.
I'm sorry about that. Condolences. That was kind of the last team that I was actually almost following. But, I grew up in South Africa. I didn't really play basketball. So, yeah, I'm more interested in technology nowadays.
Well, I'm more capable of technology nowadays.
There we go. Okay, well, let's get on to that. So, speaking of technology, I mean, on your blog, you've got a ton of posts about chunking up tables in equal sizes, and you're sharing your knowledge. And it was you and Jonathan Lewis and Bryn Llewellyn, so the PM, the Oracle product manager there. And, you obviously contribute a lot back through the forums in the OTN discussion forum for SQL and that. Tell us the background for that story. That seemed pretty interesting. What happened there?
Oh, the story about Bryn and Jonathan?
Yeah.
Well, that was a very, very wonderful and surprising thing that happened to me. I contribute in the OTN forums since around 2009. Before then, I hung out on the Ask Tom site. And Tom Kite one day complimented me on my contributions. And that made me feel so good that I decided to branch out. And so here I am on the OTN forums. And Jonathan Lewis, whom I admire, asked a question about how to chunk tables in equal sizes and how to do that in a SQL statement. And so I was one of several people who contributed and wound up adding a little something extra that made it to perform a teeny bit faster. And Jonathan marked my answer correct. And in the meantime, I discovered that he was actually working with Bryn Llewellyn on a subject that Bryn was going to present at Oracle Open World. So I wound up at Oracle Open World being invited on stage by Bryn to talk about that experience, and wound up contributing to his white paper, talking again when he presented at the UK Oracle User Group in December. And since his white paper was his point of view with his additional thoughts, I decided in my blog to take my code and clean it up and try and simplify it. and provide more explanations, which he asked me for. So that blog is kind of raw material for the next version of his white paper.
Oh, excellent.
So the result of all that is that I actually got to be on stage together with Bryn Llewellyn and Jonathan Lewis. And it's
Two
just
stellar stars in the community, yeah?
yes. So, I'm just, I feel like the moon, just this light reflecting.
Nice. Now, just for the layperson, chunking tables, why would people want to do that?
Basically, that it's...
Because isn't there a package, a PL SQL package that does exactly that?
Yes, there is. And the reason why you would want to do it you'd use the package to do it. Now, to answer the question, why would someone want to do it with or without the package? One of the things I wrote about when I was doing a lot of documentation for my company on how best to develop an Oracle, one of the things I wrote about was batch development.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things about batch programs is they sometimes have to run at the same time as online transactions. Okay. And then you've got people locking other people, and the batch program just stops waiting for some online transaction, and then the online transaction waits for the batch, and everybody's waiting for everybody else. So if you have to change a whole table and you split that table into chunks, you can do intermediate commits and free up the table bit by bit.
I see.
And so everything just goes smoothly. Basically, imagine you've got a big through street with cross streets, and the batch program is the through street. Somebody crosses and all the traffic stops. So splitting the table up into chunks is like putting in stoplights and just having people stop for a second, letting the other people through, and then moving ahead.
Ah, excellent.
So now, basically traffic lights. Now, Bryn's interest was that this package you're talking about had a bug, and he fixed the bug.
Okay.
And he fixed it using PL SQL, but he was interested to know if there was a pure SQL alternative. So his interest became theoretical because the package is now working.
Okay, so typically people would use the package to do that now.
Oh, they really should. They really should, because the package not only splits the table up into chunks, but manages the whole process of doing one chunk at a time and committing each chunk separately, letting you know where you are in the process, restarting if there's a problem in the middle of the process. The package is a complete solution.
Oh, excellent. Kind of another one of your projects. You helped Chris Saxon, one of our SQL developer advocates, on a webinar, Code Talk. And it was about temporal validity. Could you give us just a brief rundown on, what is the feature? Why is it useful?
As a general rule, I am for what Bryn Llewellyn calls the thick database. Using the database as much as you can to implement business and application logic. And for that reason, I'm always interested in the new stuff that comes in with the most recent versions. I'm a huge advocate of the match recognize clause. And in December, in Birmingham, I presented on temporal validity. Now, temporal validity... Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
UK OUG Tech 15.
Yeah.
Now, temporal validity is basically if you have data in the database and that data is only valid during a time period, that's temporal validity. Now, a lot of times what that means is, I have a home address, a home phone number, and if I move at some time, the address and the phone number will change. So what if I want to tell somebody that my new address and phone number will be valid starting next month. The guy can't just hover over his keyboard for a month, waiting till the moment I move to enter in the new values. What he needs is to have the old value and the new value with a valid time period.
Yep.
Now, temporal validity basically standardizes the way you handle those time periods by saying you've got a start date time and an end date time. And in the SQL statement, you can just say that you want to know for a certain period and for a certain point in time, what is the valid data. And that's really just about it. It's a way of identifying in the table definition what those two date time things are and which one is the start and which one is the end. So looking at the table definition, what the time period is, and you've got simpler syntax in the SQL statement to determine what's the data that you really want as of some date or time.
They've standardized that and made it a lot simpler to implement instead of people doing a lot of back-end coding to achieve the same goal.
Exactly. And when I say standardize, it's in the SQL 2011 standard.
Okay.
Yes. Now, it's handling these time periods is not that easy to think about because people think that they're dealing with dates and not date times, and they don't know whether the end date should be included in the period or not, and they don't know how to handle nulls. So the standard has decided all those things. And temporal validity implements the standard. So if you use it, then you don't have to ask yourself all these complicated questions anymore.
Okay.
So
it makes it a lot easier on the application developer to actually implement that.
So it's just another example of what I think any IT tool should do. It should make it easier to do things the right way and harder to do things the wrong way. And temporal validity does that.
Speaking of tools, what's some of your favorite tools for getting your work done?
Well, I've been working as much as I can with the Oracle database for the last 10 years. So I don't have millions and millions of tools because I was working in a big enough company that I could specialize. So I basically use Oracle SQL Developer, and I just use the heck out of it.
Okay.
And, my favorite blog on SQL Developer is Jeff Smith's blog.
Jeff Smith,
who explains, he helps me do the 5% of the product that I actually use, and then makes my mouth water with the 95% that I haven't started using yet. So it's a great tool, and basically, in the morning, I start up my VM with my Oracle database, and I start up SQL Developer, and I'm at work.
Is that how you do it? You're loading SQL Developer natively on the desktop, and you're running the Oracle database in the VM, or at least your development?
That's the way I do it, yes.
Yeah.
That way I can use the same SQL Developer when I'm getting on, quote, real databases, unquote. I'm just using my test system. And I can update, SQL Developer, you can update it much more frequently than the database itself.
And that's a very actually common development model that we've seen. That's actually something Chris Rice built, that initial database developer app VM for us, which had the database in it. And I think they've refreshed it to 12c with the latest hands-on labs as well. I don't know if that's the same one you use, but a lot of people use it exactly like you are, in a virtual box on the desktop with the SQL Developer running native on the actual desktop. You've obviously had a lot of experience, and you've obviously come across people doing different different things. And sometimes I'm sure you must have just shake your head and like, really, are they going to try that? What's some interesting stories that you can share with us in terms of, how people are either using or misusing the technology?
To start with, I should explain that I'm sort of a convert to the Oracle database. And, converts tend to be passionate people.
Okay.
I spent about 25 years in IT doing lots of different things, but not relational databases. And then about 10 years ago, there was this software package we'd purchased that had poor performance. And I needed to figure out why, and, had to learn about, tracing, TK prof, things like that. Had to learn how to write a select statement at the same time, and discovered that this software package was just sending a SQL statement for every little bit of data that it wanted. So for one list of work items, it was of
round trip.
Yeah, it was 100 lines and 600 SQL statements. And so, I just kept on learning stuff, a lot of it from the Ask Tom site, until I could get that information with one SQL statement, which the software package vendors refused to use. So now my company doesn't use that software package anymore. But that helped me learn that the database is a fabulous tool if you just accept to use it. And the database should contain the data-oriented business logic. So I kept on my interest in that, and people started asking me to fix problems that they couldn't fix themselves using their Java-oriented skills. Lots of times batch programs, a Java program would go get data and do something to it and then put it back in the database. I remember once there was a 1 hour Java program. It took an hour, and people were supposed to sit behind a screen and wait for an hour for this thing to come back. And I replaced that by one SQL statement that took 5 seconds.
Wow.
Now, a lot of people have actually done things like that.
Yeah.
This is not an unusual thing. I did it myself again in other circumstances in my company more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's when you think about all that you could do to make things, work faster and also to have cleaner and more coherent data, then it's just amazing how much we could do if we were allowed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one program that I was associated with that was, very much wanted to standardize on Java, write once, run anywhere, etc. They did standardize on the Oracle database as the database platform, but they tended to use it just as a bit bucket.
Okay.
However, they did pay for me to write up recommendations on using the Oracle database, and I wound up writing several documents that together would make a book, Oracle Development Principles and Guidelines, lots of things about batch programs that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very interesting and rewarding time because I got to write all this stuff up, and whenever people asked me to intervene, I just applied that stuff, and magically things worked.
Uh-huh. You're like, hey, use the right tool for the right job, and it's amazing how much easier your life will get.
Yeah, especially if you use the right programmer.
Yeah, there we go.
Because, that is the other thing is, it's not really just Java versus the Oracle database or PL SQL. It's really kind of, a sporting contest, you talked about KU at the beginning. We want to win.
Yeah.
So, with the Oracle database, if you can use it, if you're allowed to use it well, you can really win.
So you've said a couple of times, allowed to. Do you find in your experience that a lot of times that's been the problem is kind of political leanings of an environment that work environment that you're in, that, maybe there's, look, we're just going to do everything in the middle tier versus, okay, you've got this really intensive data-centric business logic that by rights would probably be better handled in the back-end database tier. Do you find that that's often the problem is that people aren't, necessarily allowed to use your words, use the right tool for the right job?
Yes, I think that is, in my experience, that was definitely a problem. Part of it is that, the bigger the company gets and the more you want to outsource certain things, like the actual development itself, you may outsource it. So you basically have people who say what needs to be done who haven't actually been doing things themselves for a long time.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm more, I like development. Mm-hmm. And I've been a developer whenever I've been able to be one, even though I was actually paid to be an architect mostly. So, I'm a pretty hands-on guy, and I don't like to recommend people to do things unless I've done them myself and I know that they work.
Yeah.
But not everybody can do that. Mm-hmm. So you've got architects who are using ideas that they've learned or that they've read or that Gartner has spoken about, and they haven't been able to confront those ideas with
reality.
Well, it's just not, their careers just haven't gone that way.
Yeah.
So you've got the G2EE dogma, not just Java. I mean, Java's write once, run anywhere, okay. But on top of that, you have this Java 2 Enterprise Edition, G2EE mm-hmm. architecture, which has a lot of good things, this.
Yeah.
Let's break the code into layers: presentation, application, and data. Mm-hmm. But if you want to do everything in Java and it's all got to be portable and write once, run anywhere, blah, 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 then suddenly you're not allowed to use the database as a service provider, and you're not allowed to use the specific added value of a specific database product.
Yeah.
And the result of that, since you've got all these layers working on different physical machines, is the application is spending all its time waiting for little bits of information to go back and forth on the network. Mm-hmm. One thing that I learned very early on reading my first bit of Oracle documentation is reduce round trips.
Yeah.
Don't ask 50 million little teeny tiny questions to the database. Mm-hmm. Tell the database what you want and let the database give you back a full answer. Now, the best way to do that is using stored procedures. But even without that, if you use good SQL statements, you can do a lot better.
Yeah. Any advice that you would give to, young university student or somebody that's starting out that's considering technologies and that, why would they learn SQL?
Okay, I'll try and answer that question. Why would they learn SQL? I did not study IT in college.
Okay.
I started out, I took a Fortran course before I even went to college. Dropped it, did a bit of theater, did classical literature, got a master's in philosophy, mm-hmm. and discovered that, I could do computer programming fine because I knew how to read, I knew how to write, I knew how to speak, I knew how to listen. How important is it to be able to listen, to understand what people are driving at, mm-hmm. To misunderstand? How many arguments in business meetings are two people who are actually talking about different things?
Yeah.
logic, all these things, they're qualities that will always work. Whereas, the latest framework, this and that, all that stuff is here today and gone tomorrow. Now, SQL is one of those things that you can study that is not here today and gone tomorrow, because it's just too useful. It's been around too long, and it's just getting better and better.
Yeah.
You didn't ask about this directly, but I have written and presented a lot about the match recognize clause.
Yeah.
Which came with Oracle 12c. That to me is a huge plus, a huge addition to the SQL language that helps you understand problems in a different way and solve them in a different and very, very efficient way. So here's a language that's been around forever, but which is providing new stuff all the time. Match recognize just being an example, temporal validity another. So, it's a living thing that is evolving and that continues to be exciting. So I would say to young people, don't worry so much about training, worry about education. Become someone who can use your intelligence yourself and with others. And in terms of subject matter, don't spend too much time on things that are going to disappear tomorrow. And SQL is something that is not going to disappear. Plus, with SQL, you're just going to be able to do things 10 times or 100 times and occasionally 1,000 times faster than the other people. So, and that's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, anytime you can reduce an hour-long query down to 5 seconds, you come up looking like the superstar. So that is fun.
Especially to yourself, you can talk about it 10 years later.
Yeah, there we go. Great, Stu. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your contributions to the community, and congratulations on being selected as finalist in the SQL category.
But I actually thought that I won that category, and then I realized I was sorting the vote numbers in ascending order.
You know what? You did win in that category. Every single finalist was a winner. I mean, and that was the beauty of the whole awards program is, if somebody got chosen as a finalist, they were a winner. They went through a panel of ace directors and that, and ace guys and Oracle development. You are a winner. You didn't win the category.
Thanks so much, Todd. I'll be sure and play that part of this interview back several times.
You're a winner, Stu. Thanks again. Have a good one.